Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, everybody. My name is John Stritzinger, and I am here to do the second of a three-part series. And tonight we are going to be covering proxy web configurations from Apache server to a REST interface on a Debian 12 Linux server. And the Linux server is hosted at Google Cloud. And we may or may not, during our demo, mess around a little bit with Google Cloud. But I'm trying to keep this one a little shorter than my last one. So what I'm going to do tonight, in my first series, I went through the IIS web server and how to proxy to a project running on Windows Server. So taking your Visual Studio Code that you're writing a REST interface to and making it available on the public internet. Now, a lot of what you see on YouTube as far as training goes is very tailored to local hosts. And this solution is how do you sort of get your working project to the public internet and to something that's more useful globally. So whether that be your metro network or your wide area network at work, or it could be a public interface. All of those things are a lot more complicated than just hacking around from your classroom activities. So tonight I'm going to go through a short PowerPoint. It just explains the learning environment that we're going to be working with tonight. And then I'm going to take you through a command line tutorial. And then I'm going to demonstrate a program called WebMin that was packaged with the original Debian loads. It's written by a friend of mine, and certainly highly recommend installing WebMin on literally every Linux platform that you roll out on your own. But before I do that, I'm going to share my screen here. You're going to lose my beautiful face for a little while. And I am going to take you through just one thing real quick before we get started. I did provision on GoDaddy, which is my record of choice, a web host on Google Cloud, and you notice that Google has 35 block. So this is a public interface that I have on Google. It's running on a virtual machine. The virtual machine is running Debian 12. So I am on a workstation on campus tonight, and I'm just running NSLookup, and NSLookup will return the registered domain address from your local server. So you can see that I'm running here from sc.edu, and they're returning this address. So they have a complicated DNS architecture here, but you get the point. It is returning the right address. So why that's important is I'm going to be using that address as my internet URL, and that is going to be redirected into my API in just a little bit. So we have verified that my site is up, and I can even ping that address just to make sure we have reachability here. Otherwise, I might stop my video. But you can see that my server is actually provisioned in Iowa, and I'm here in South Carolina, and I have a 28 millisecond round trip time. So that's pretty good. That is good enough to run just about any application on the planet. So my Google host is in Iowa, and I'm here in South Carolina, and we have a 28 millisecond round trip time. So that's very cool. All right, so we are going into just a short PowerPoint here, and what we're going to be demonstrating today is building a real URL I already showed you part of that. We're going to be remapping HTTPS to a local host via a rewrite rule in Apache server. I'm going to show you how to configure Visual Studio for a specific port. And then we are going to test both SSL and probably, if we get to it, HTTP as well, which runs on port 80. So standard SSL runs on port 443 and standard web runs on port 80. So that's probably nothing new to you. Now, what we're showing you tonight competes with probably what you're doing in your classroom with Docker. Docker runs on your runs as a desktop and allows you to create different containers. Each of the containers has its own logical port structure. So although your workstation or your server running Docker has just 65,000 ports, each container actually has its own stack. So you can map ports on the local host to the port in the container. So what that is doing is proxy redirect, just like I'm showing you here tonight. So that is definitely a competing solution. When you configure Docker, you configure the YML file, and that does the mapping that is pretty close to what I'll show you tonight. Now, competing with that is when you go into Visual Studio, you can run your application on any port. So if you have a Linux appliance and it's not running a web server, you can load your API on port 80 and it'll run because it's not in conflict with anything that's running on the stack. So if you want to just dedicate a machine on port 80 and not mess with any of this stuff, certainly that's a competing solution. Normally we don't do that because we're trying to hide our database connectivity from our customers, and so that they can't get directly to our REST interfaces. But if you add things like authentication and SSL, you have pretty good security. So if you're in a place that allows you to do that, it is possible to make the public web pretty secure from end to end. I showed you IIS in my first video. This is the second. NG-INX is the third solution, and it's just about as easy as the configuration I'm going to show you here tonight. In this video, we're just focused on Apache server. So I've given you the competing methods. I've given you what we're looking at tonight. And I will tell you that most of the training content that I have found on the web does give you either the wrong answer or something that's not tailored to what you're trying to do as a developer. So this is targeted specifically to Microsoft developers who want to make their solution workable in their enterprise environment. Now, in order to do that, the nice thing about Linux and Apache server is you can be very specific on the URLs you want to match to and how you're going to proxy them into the API. So you don't have to send everything that goes to your public URL to your API. You can just do specific subdirectories. And I didn't show that in the first video, but I'm going to show that to you tonight. So you do have a little bit of a bonus. Now, what we're running tonight, we are running WebMin that has virtual min installed. And if you don't have those, then some kind of command line utility like Vim or Pico would be required to do what I'm going to show you tonight. I am running Apache Web Server 2.4. It's a vanilla configuration. If you type apt-get Apache, Apache 2, it will install on your Debian. And we are enabling specific mods on the Apache server. And you can do that either from the command line, or tonight I'm going to show you how to do that from Webmin, which is kind of fancy if you've never used Webmin before. On the coding requirements, I am using a compiled version of a REST API that comes with Visual Studio. It's the default app. And so if you build a new REST interface from the command line, you get a weather controller, and the weather controller responds back with generated temperatures and whether it's cloudy or rainy. So there are like 5 options that it picks in random order. So it just responds back with a random number and a random, condition outside. So when you hit the API, we'll show you in just a minute, that's what it does. So right now we have the API running on a local host, and I'm using port 8008 tonight, and that is sort of in the RFC category along with alt HTTP. So 8080 and port 8008 are in the RFC standards for an alternate HTTP destination. Now, what we are going to show you tonight, we are not going to REST, but we're going to grest.geolocation.info. Again, this is on a Google Cloud server across the world. We're going to hit a REST API, and then we are going to test it. So we'll show you some features tonight. And I talked a little bit about Swagger last time. I didn't end up giving the Swagger demo, so I'm going to add a little supplement at the end that shows you different ways to test your API. There's Postman. This is a module I found by searching around in VS Code and Swagger. So there are 3 tools that are used out there, but actually, if you hit your API on the root without an ID or some kind of constraint, then it should return all the data on the API or ask you for an authentication. So that's pretty much the bulk of what I wanted to show from a slide perspective. And what I have up here now is Webmin. And I was talking about the modules enabled for the web server. And if you've never used Webmin before, it has a tool here that when you install Apache server from the command line, when you click on the menu here, you'll see that the Apache web server is enabled. It gives you some cool tools about how your server is performing. This is very similar to Task Manager in Windows. And it has a number of things. You can run command shells, you can configure your PHP, you can change your networking, your hardware, and the like. So it has basic modules that come with it, and Apache Server is one of those. And when you click on this, it'll show you all your virtual hosts. So you can see that I have many on my operations server here. But if you click on global configuration and you click on configure Apache modules, what you're going to go in and do is enable specific modules that relate to proxy. So all these proxy HTML, proxy HTTP, proxy HTTP2, proxy connect, proxy express, all these proxy ones you want to turn on. So when you turn all those on and you get them ready, then you just need to make sure that your SSL stack is running, which is down here. And that will pretty much get you to the point where you're working. Now, I've seen different documentations requiring this SO cache one as well. It certainly doesn't hurt, but some people say that it's required, and I haven't gone through the regression testing yet, but I will take their word for it for right now. But anyway, all of this can be turned on very quickly, And webmin, this will take you maybe 30 seconds. And after you highlight one, if you click the green button to enable them, they turn on. And then once you do that, if you go back to the root and you hit apply changes, then it will make the changes and it will actually recycle your Apache server. So you don't have to type anything at all on the command line. Now to get to here, I won't tell you exactly how I do that, but there is a login into Webmin. You'll figure it out in a few minutes. But once you install Webmin, then you get to this tool. Now, I have my API running already. I'm just going to show you a few more things. The nice thing about Webmin is it does allow you to shell out to a command prompt. And from the command prompt, I am going to go into DevOps and I am going to go into my weather project that I installed on Linux. So yes, .NET does run on Linux and it does work very well. It's even, in fact, it's so great on Linux. I almost blush to say that I don't really want to use Windows again, but Visual Studio on Windows is sort of required to do very complex tasks. But if you have a built API and you want to put it out on the net, all you have to do is copy it up, install the right .NET modules, and then recompile it for Linux instead of Windows, and it will do the rest for you. But I'm going to go into properties here. I hope to spell it right. And I'm going to look, I'm using VI, which is the command line Vim editor. And when I open, did I spell it right? It's not spelled right. I didn't. Launch settings. Not JSON. All right. So what I've done here tonight, I have set up Visual Studio to go to port 8008, as you can see right here. And when you do that, it ends up building the REST interface to listen on not localhost 8008, but all traffic going to port 8008. So by default, Microsoft Kestrel Server, which is what is packaged with .NET, will fire up and run on port 8008. So Kestrel is a full web server. It was intended to replace IIS, but never has, mainly because it doesn't have a web administration utility yet. Somebody will probably build one for it someday. But as of now, it doesn't, and it's just a command line web server that runs. By the way, what I'm using in Webmin, they have their own web server as well, and it's not Apache, it's running on port 8080, and it's a Perl web server. So Webmin runs on Perl, and it runs out of band from your customer traffic. So it's very cool because even if your Apache server has crashed or your NGINX server has crashed, you can still get to Webmin. So as a ops guy myself, I do appreciate that. But anyway, if you go under the properties of your project and update your app settings, you just have to specify the ports that it's going to listen to. Now, when I installed the project, I installed it with controllers and without HTTPS. So I didn't install secure server on my API in this example. The one I did last night that I showed you, I did. So I am now on my public server, and I am going to try, and I haven't tested this out, so I may crash my whole demonstration here, but I am going to I'm confident that I just tested it. So there we go. So I have provisioned a public interface, and when I hit the public interface to port 8008, it is going to the weather forecast, and it is presenting the right output, as you can see there on the screen. So this is what we were trying to accomplish. The API is working and it is running in the background. Now, to verify that, if you're on a Unix machine, you can do ps -ef, and you can do grep, and you can search for .NET services running. And there you can see that I'm running .NET run, and the process of the server, the task that's running is 10.621. Now, if I want to stop that service, even when I'm logged in as root, so I can kill the service by just doing kill -9 and the process number, and it will stop the service, but I'm not going to do that right now. I didn't install it with systemd yet because I'm still in development, but it is running. And on Linux, starting a service is beautifully done. You can do it with the address symbol afterwards, which will make your process run in the background and returns your command prompt back to you. So a little bit of Unix knowledge is helpful. And then you can do really cool things on Linux that you can't do on Windows, actually. So I find it much better once you have a compiled code. Getting to compile code, however, is a different thing. So what I'm doing at my house is I'm doing production on Windows, but once I built my APIs, I much prefer to have them run on Linux. They're faster. They don't require 6 to 8 gigs of RAM to run Visual Studio, and they're just lightning fast. So anyway, Microsoft has a great development environment, but once you're done with it, when you load it up to Linux, you'll be much happier with the results. So we have shown this environment. I only have to show you 2 more things, and then we'll call it quits for the day. If you go into your Apache configuration, now I showed you that I have in fact configured a web service to that site. Okay, so I have an index page that just says index on it. So when I type grest.glocation.info and hit return, it just says index.html. So it's not doing anything. It's not redirecting any traffic that's destined to the root of the directory. Okay, so that is very fancy. I didn't show that in my first video, but I'm showing you now. What I'm about to show you is just to redirect a subdirectory and not the entire URL. So you can run your APIs in line with the rest of your traffic, which is a very important thing to do. Because you don't have to have 2 servers to do everything or a separate appliance to run your APIs. You can do it all from the same web service, which is a very nice thing. So anyway, I have searched all the public sources. I've read everyone's documentation, and the best one I found was from a specific provider who does VPS hosting, and they had a simple solution, which I'm going to show you hopefully here in a second. Let's see. It's not loading my configuration here. Maybe it would help if I clicked on it. Well, I may have to go out the manual. All right. So anyway, if you it's giving me trouble with my. Okay, sorry, I got it working here. It doesn't like my SSL certificate yet. I just installed it tonight and it hasn't synced yet. Sometimes they take 48 hours before the rest of the internet likes them. But anyway, what I've done to make this work is really just 2 lines. There are 2 lines in IIS, which I showed you in the first clip. And there are two lines here. In Apache, what you do is you go into the virtual site that's available, and you just configure it and add these two proxy pass lines. Now, the proxy pass lines take the subdirectory that you specify, in this case, weather forecast, and it redirects just that one directory. Now, if you don't put the directory in and you just put the root, anything that hits that website will go to the redirected proxy destination. And you can see that it's going to port 8008. So when I hit the proxy, if everything works right, it should go to the weather forecast directory, and I'm going to show you that here in just a second. But that's pretty much it. If you put in the destination of your port and your API URL, sometimes these are API/users or API/products, whatever you're using in your API, those will go. But if you're using just the standard .NET project, the weather forecast, it will use the weather forecast environment. So what I'm going to do is, we know that is running, and I'm going to put in the weather forecast, and there we go. I've showed you that we're now proxying on an Apache server at Google Cloud from a URL that I provisioned there to the API. The API is running, and it is delivering the right data. So in this case, I'm only running the API in HTTP on port 8008. It is not running SSL at all. So we've done what's called SSL offloading. We are terminating the SSL stream on our proxy interface, and then we're allowing it to go to the background. Now, there are very advanced configurations you can do with Apache as a load balancer, and I will show you a little bit of those in our third video. And what you can do with Apache is not just have one REST API, but you could have a cluster running your API. So if you had 8 machines running your API, you can actually use Apache to load balance the result to a destination. And if you add round robin DNS, you can have multiple Apache servers running as proxies to multiple destinations. And that gets into very scalable, public internet type design. So I won't do that tonight, but this is the conclusion of our second series of 3. Hopefully this is valuable to you. Please click like and subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to hit 12,000 subscribers so that Google will give me my own faceplate. I have my own faceplate at Twitter and Facebook now, but I don't have the one I want, which is YouTube, but I am getting there. Anyway, thank you very much. Again, my name is John Stritzinger. I'm the CEO of Greenville Associates, and geolocation.info is our managed service subsidiary. Thank you.